made to you so special? Nothing. I'm just a kid from Brooklyn.
Two rules that I always say before any of my videos is number one is spoilers. And yes, these movies are very, very new, but we probably will spoil some stuff. So we're gonna throw a spoiler warning in there, right? Rule number two, and this is a big one. This is a favorites list, not a best list. Best way that anybody can if they want to come back at us, send us yours. I'd love to see that input. Okay, so my first honorable mention is Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. This is a slasher, but it's a very, very different. And that's what I like about it. It's so different. It's extremely clever. The best way I could compare it to would be something like April Fool's Day.
Yes, it's totally like that 10 Little Indians April Fool's Day of like the modern era.
Very similar. You have this group of Gen Zers and they're at a hurricane party, which I didn't even know was a thing because I live in New York. So they're doing drugs, they're partying, and they play a game called Bodies, 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 where one of them is assigned as the killer, and everybody's trying to figure out who the killer is. Unfortunately, later that night, somebody dies. They find one of them dead, and everybody starts pointing fingers. But the thing that made it so interesting to me is the characters. They're so unlikable. These are not characters for you to like. Almost like they're speaking in another language. Seriously. And they're rich kids. So the things that they're complaining about, one of them complains about like starting their channel or something. And I started cracking up like, you don't know how hard it is. You have to set up these things and you have to get your followers. I was dying laughing through that whole part because she's bitching about something that I took to heart, And then it has an ending that is unique. I've never seen it in any other horror movie. So, and I'm not going to spoil that, but it's so unique.
No, I agree. It's a lot of fun. Sarah liked it a lot more than I did, but that's how it goes sometimes. Speaking of streaming, my first honorable mention is a movie called Deadstream. It's probably the last of the COVID movies, and this was absolutely no budget. It wouldn't surprise me if they did this for like $1,500. Written, directed, and starring Joseph Winter as Sean, a canceled streamer who is just a complete unlikable douchebag, but he's very charming, and he's kind of trying to win back his audience, and he goes into this like notorious haunted house and starts messing around with ancient artifacts and some Evil Dead type stuff. I mean, we're talking special effects, if I could even say that, and props from like a Spirit Halloween. But the heart and the execution is there, and we had a lot of fun with it. We've seen it at least 3 times.
I enjoyed it. It only suffered because one of your other choices was kind of a similar type of theme, and I saw that one first and enjoyed that one more. But there was one moment in this movie that had me dying laughing because there was like a moment where he finds something in a closet. It's like a symbol, and he tears it up.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of his followers messages him, and he says, "My grandmother knows what that symbol is. It's the symbol." And he puts his grandmother on, and she's like, "Yeah. The symbol means it's something to protect you." And he's like, "Grandma, he ripped it," and she's like, "Oh." You're screwed. You're gonna die. Yeah. Oh my God, I spit my drink.
Yeah, no, I was dying.
Spit my drink. That was hilarious. All right, so we're up to my second honorable mention, which is Eli Roth's Thanksgiving. Look, he fulfills his promise by giving us a holiday slasher. It feels very 90s slasher, which I would have preferred 80s or grindhouse 70s.
Yes.
One of the things I like about it is that it has the potential for a franchise, it has your Mask Killer, John Carver Killer. The mask is cool, and it had some really, really good kills. I don't remember where they were. Was it Boston? They had that Boston accent. A lot of characters.
I think it's Plymouth. I think.
Yeah, it probably is. But they had like that New England Boston.
Oh, everybody talked like Family Guy.
Exactly. So I always love that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I liked the movie. I didn't love it, and the problem is I was spoiled. Like, I wanted the '70s Grindhouse one from the trailer. I mean, they put out so many of those fake movies. Thankfully, it's just this one got held up for years, and by the time he released it, it was like, all right, that craze is over. Let's just make it a little bit more modern, and it is what it is. They cut out a lot of like what would have been had it come out at the time of something like Planet Terror, like the first Machete, But whatever, it was still fun. So my next honorable mention is another streaming found footage, Dash Cam. This one, I don't even know how I found it, but I saw the premise and I was like, all right, I'll watch that. Definitely a COVID movie, and this one it's actually in the plot because we follow Annie Hardy, who is basically like the closest possible representation of the comedian Chrissy Meyer. And she's in Europe and she's like an Uber driver and she's just the biggest piece of shit imaginable. She's rude to everyone, just accusing everyone of like spying on her, saying like every buzzword possible. And she basically gets caught up in what's very obviously like a zombie outbreak that's starting. And we see everything basically from the view of her dash cam. And it's fucking hilarious throughout.
This is the one that I saw this one before I saw your previous, and it was so good. Starts out with her as a character, and she's visiting one of her best friends from college or something. And she's going into, stores and not wearing her mask and all that stuff. And I'm like, oh, is this gonna be like political? And I'm really not big on political stuff, but this movie totally won me over, man. Oh, she's hilarious. You say zombie, I thought the character was like a vampire or something. I don't know.
I mean, it's left ambiguous.
It
It's
really
definitely left
is.
ambiguous.
It really is. And some were scares that were like, your basic jump scare and stuff. Yeah, you're gonna see that. But there were other ones that were like slow, or you had to look for it. Like
Mm-hmm.
at one point they end up in a forest and they're looking for this like old lady that they're supposed to be taking care of. And the old lady's up in a tree. And if you don't look, you don't like see it right away. It takes a second. You're like, what? How the hell did this old lady get up at the top of a tree?
Yep.
Great. And it just takes you for this kind of ride, right? Like it's like a ride. My next honorable mention is Smile. It suffers a little bit because it is very similar to a previous movie called It Follows. Basically follows that same kind of story where you have some sort of entity, you know, kind of going from host to host. When I watched it the first time, I was like, all right, this is It Follows, but without like that aspect that It Follows has. But by the end of the movie, it won me over because it's way better than It Follows. If It Follows was a little slow, this one has a great pace. And then what made it more interesting was the marketing. They did this like big marketing for the movie where they had ads, they had commercials, they had places where all of a sudden you would look and like a whole bunch of people start smiling that creepy ass smile.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really clever, to get people to go and watch the movie. And it worked. And you have a sequel now, which is doing pretty good. I don't think it's as good as the first one, but it's fun. You have another movie on your list, also kind of follows that a little bit. So
Yeah.
when we get to it, I'm going to mention it. I'll mention that same comparison.
Actually, we like the second one better.
Okay.
I thought it was all right. I'm on record as not a big It Follows fan, and Sarah pretty much hates it. For this one, I could see the It Follows connection. I thought it was more in line with, I think it was 2018's Truth or Dare, because that one had like a demon and a cell phone that did a creepy smile. I was expecting more like schlock, more comedy, whether it was real or unintentional. This one, it was good. It's just I felt like I'd seen this movie before. Sarah would kill me for having this only as an honorable mention. 2021, James Wan's Malignant. I remember people going absolutely apeshit that James Wan was back with a brand new story. Apparently, it was inspired by like throwback Italian giallo, which we've covered a lot on this podcast. So we couldn't wait to see what he was going to do. And oh my God, to her credit, Sarah figured it out in like the opening scene. and she just immediately like looked at me and she was like, "Oh, it's this movie." Basically, it is a very, very loose remake of Basket Case, and if you know the movie Basket Case, you're in for what a ride.
Was like this strange sort of modern movie with more of a retro plot. The reveal is either gonna like it's either gonna make you like do a face palm, or you're gonna think it's brilliant.
Or you're gonna laugh your ass off too.
Yeah. Reason that held me back was the CG. It has a lot. James Wan, he's big, so he was able to have a good budget for this. And they had these kind of transition whenever the main character would shift, so to speak, where she was getting a vision. The whole room would kind of shift in this kind of CGI
Yep.
way. It kind of took me off a little bit, but listen, you got to give him credit, man. He came up with an idea, and it was clever. And I always give kudos to that. My number 10 is Evil Dead Rise. And if you're a fan of the old campy trilogy, you probably don't like this movie, but I love it. It automatically became one of my favorite movies to watch on Mother's Day. The performance of the mother character in it, the intro gets you really hyped, and it kind of throws you off because all these Evil Dead movies are usually like take place in like a cabin in the woods, most of them, and so it starts out that way, with the intro, and that kind of throws you off a little bit. And instead, it has more like a family aspect. I'm digging the way these newer, more modern Evil Dead movies are going. You can't do that old '80s campy stuff. Maybe you could. I don't know. Maybe you could. I don't know if you're gonna get away with it with these, audiences that we have now. You and I may
We both
appreciate
have
it.
a movie on our list that is pretty fucking campy and pretty fucking 80s, so I
I
think you
guess.
can get away with it. Like the Evil Dead Rise, I mean, on paper, it's basically like, what if we did a darker, more serious Demons 2? And I really wish they steered into that sked. Demons 2 is basically what if Demons was a Die Hard movie. They had the high rise, like there's basically one floor that we ever see, and they did build like a really elaborate hallway. I've seen all the behind the scenes stuff. It looks really cool. I would have liked if they played more with the whole building, because the building is built onto like an ancient bank vault going back to like Prohibition era, and they find one of the 3 books of the dead. Apparently, the 3 books in Army of Darkness are now the 3 books in these movies. So the original trilogy followed the 2013, or was it 2013 or 2010? I forget. That had the second one, and now this one has the third one. Big issue with this movie. Like the characters were great. The mother was great. She's a contortionist. She does like all this crazy shit. The cheese grater was way overhyped. And I mean, that was just, I don't know if that was like actual genuine fan reaction or like a weird forced marketing campaign, but like I saw that and I was like, that was nothing. That was stupid. There is something that happens at the end, speaking of getting into spoilers, that I was laughing my ass off because the Deadites kind of form of Voltron.
Yeah, they really do. They kind of like merge, and that was probably the silliest part of the movie. Yeah, I'll agree. And it goes to what I said about endings. They go for it with these newer movies. They kind of go for it. There's a part where the mother's in the tub and they're like, "Mom," and she's like, "Mommy's with the maggots now." It's such a classic line. And then there's another part where they lock her out in the hallway, and she starts running around just randomly killing people in the hallway. And it
Yeah, and you
just
see it through
makes
the
me laugh.
people. It's pretty
And you
cool.
see it through the people. I laugh every and
My number 10 is The Mean One, 2022. Directed by Stephen Lamort. This one is basically, in the line of the dark childhood movies, but it is and it isn't in that universe. It is David Howard Thornton, of course, Art the Clown, playing the Grinch, but they could not say the Grinch, so he's the mean one. Um, Everything that I didn't like about the first Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, and a couple of these other movies, I loved about this movie. If you're going to do it, you got to have some semblance of the original story. You got to play with the lore. and you got to have kills and victims on point with the story itself. And I mean, I love Christmas horror movies. This one immediately jumped onto my Christmas horror list, probably in the top 10. I haven't looked at it in a while, but it's a dark, realistic take on the classic Dr. Seuss Grinch tale. They can't say Cindy Lou Who, so it's Cindy You Know Who. And her mother is killed by the Grinch in what might or might not be a home invasion or a case of mistaken identity. She grows up and becomes a cop, and this thing like lives in the mountains and is just, eating people year after year. The evil mayor, who is basically like, what if the mayor from Jaws had a daughter? If you blink and you miss it, she's the same name as the guy who is like the snake oil salesman that sells the stars to the Sneetches. I thought it was great. It's a lot of fun. It's got some really great kills. It's got a candy cane shotgun. I mean, what more could you want?
I agree. And the thing that when it comes to all these, like, I think they're called Poohverse movies or whatever you call them.
The Pooniverse, yep.
The thing you have to know going in is, these movies are made so on the cheap. They're waiting for these like IPs to become free, you're free to use them. And I thought it was really clever. There's even a character called Dr. Zeus, obviously being Dr. Seuss, just like the Winnie the Pooh one. Like, it's cheap, but it's got some pretty good kills in it. So I'm all about the kills. I can deal with cheap. Like, obviously the characters didn't look like the Whoville, with the button noses and the ears and everything. They didn't have money for that. So you kind of just got to forget about them. And then the Grinch outfit is very, very basic.
Yeah.
The Grinch mask almost only has one facial expression, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, but since it's David Howard Thornton, he did a great job with it. And I like the whole Sarah Connor kind of homage that's there. So that worked for me. I enjoyed it. My number 9 is Alien Romulus. So yeah, Alien Romulus, Fede Alvarez doing an Alien movie, and like I said, it doesn't have much as far as story. But if you're a fan of all the Alien movies, including the bad ones, you're gonna get something out of this because it's got so much stuff in there. And one of the things that I love that Fede did was that, people forget the first Alien movie with the artists who did all the effects. Geiger pretty much.
I think it's Giger, yeah.
Geiger, whatever. Roxanne used to work in the clubs in Manhattan, and they had it. I believe it was Tunnel the Tunnel had a Giger room. So that's how popular he was. But the point of the fact is, in the first Alien movie, blink and you'll miss it. There's nothing but like everywhere. Like the whole movie is just very, very visceral, very phallic, putting this stuff all in your face. So Alvarez very well goes back to that, almost to an extreme. Chuck, like there's one point where a guy shoves his rifle into like this big pod where an alien is gestating in. It looks like he's penetrating the pod. I mean,
Sarah made the same comment. She's like, that just looks like a giant on the wall.
Exactly. And then it goes into some other stuff from like Prometheus and stuff like that. They kind of one of the worst Alien movies is Resurrection, I think, and because of its ending, and they actually recreated that ending. And this is another thing. Like I said, they could have given you one ending. They gave you like 3 at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
Which prolonged the runtime and annoyed me. But one of the endings is the ending to Resurrection, but done with like a Prometheus type twist. And it was awesome.
I mean, there's definitely visual aspects of it that I appreciated. Overall, I didn't like the movie. I know Sarah liked it a lot more than I did, but this is the one where I realized like a lot of these, legacy, sequel, reboot, remake, whatever that I don't like. It's like, how big a fan am I of the franchise? How invested am I? And like, do I really, care positively or negatively? And I was like, This is Alien. There are so many bad Alien movies and so many worse Alien movies than this one. I was like, I don't really care, you know? Like, yeah, there's some cringe moments, like when the robot brother says, "Get away from her, you bitch," and he's almost saying it like an ad lib, like a question. But you know, they're like the Nostromo blew up twice in the original, and it's here, it's floating in space. The aliens here, he's still got the spear in him. They bring him back to life. You know, they basically have like freeze dried face huggers that all defrost. Like, there are some very, very stupid writing decisions in this movie, but at the end of the day, it's fine. It's enjoyable. Speaking of things that are just miserable, 2022's Candyland. This was definitely a me movie. I found at the end of, I believe it was the end of 22, and I watched it at like the start of 23, and went back and put it on my 22 list before we did our wrap up show. This is definitely a gritty, like 70s feel. It's about this girl who escapes from like a church cult and becomes a lot lizard living amongst like trailer park, truck stop. And basically, you know, is she innocent? Is she a serial killer? Is she trying to convert them? Are they trying to convert her? What is her attachment to the church? You know, where's that all going to end up? And it's just a fun. I don't know if it's even fun. It's pretty miserable, but it's a intriguing, very like early 80s, late 70s feeling proto slasher.
I liked it. Here's the thing. I mean, the entire setup was great. You're talking about these kind of truck stops where I've been stopping at them all my life, either to get coffee or to get gas. And you stop at these places, for whatever, 10, 20 minutes, and you move on. You never think about, people living around there, what they're doing, how they're surviving, and, the whole truck stop thing going on. I thought it was clever. I thought it reminded me of like those documentaries about that you used to see all the time on cable, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So I was all in. I was all in, and then you introduce this young woman, and she kind of like it just gets indoctrinated to them. I thought there was some interesting characters there. If you ever saw the movie Gone Girl, there's kind of like a Gone Girl moment where
Mm-hmm.
she hooks up with somebody, and then like the next thing you know, it's covered in blood, getting off on it, so to speak. The ending, not so much. The end, like I was expecting like one of these to be like a final girl type situation. It didn't go that way. It's something like a niche kind of movie that I would recommend to certain people. Like if you're into like the sexier, more skin kind of movies, this is something I would recommend to certain people for that. Okay, so my next one, number 8, is Infinity Pool. I thought this was the craziest horror movie of last year. You've got cloning, you've got public executions, orgies, and mainly lots of different bodily fluids. Why? I have no idea. It was almost like whoever was making this movie was like, okay, in this scene, I want to see, I want to see some. And then the next scene, he's like, yeah, let's get some blood here. And then, oh, okay, we're doing a clone scene. Let's have the person be cloned in some sort of black goop, you
Well, this one
know.
is also
Yeah,
Cronenberg's kid, you know,
yeah,
so that's
yeah.
why.
So, yeah, but there was something about liquids. I don't know. It was like a theme in the movie, like a hidden theme. The plot is so twisted. You've got this kind of country that nobody's ever heard of, but these really, really rich people go there for vacation, and you stay in those resorts. And anybody who goes on these big vacations, you stay in the resort, they tell you don't leave the resort. You go to Jamaica, you go to Mexico, they're like, don't leave. It's like a married couple, and the husband is just totally emasculated. Like the wife is the one with the money, and he's just a follower. They meet another couple, and the other couple convinced them to leave the resort, and all types of just craziness, all types of. And then just when you think that's what you think the plot of the movie is, it goes weirder and darker. And then the whole thing about him being emasculated comes into play. Mia Goth is there, and she always plays like crazy bitch. Like that's where she excels, playing somebody crazy.
I loved it. I'm looking at my list and I'm like, it was a hard cut, but I went up and down, and like we said, it's favorites, not best. If it was the best list, it would probably be in like the top three. My number 8 is The Dark and the Wicked. This is a possession, haunting, farmhouse horror movie. It's like the most A24 movie that wasn't A24. This is Brian Bertino, who was the guy who did the original Strangers. And then in 2016, he did one of my favorite actual A24 movies called The Monster, which no one ever talks about. Zoe Kazan. It's so good. So it was kind of a thing where like I put his name on a list, and if he was going to do anything, I'm like, I'm going to watch his movie. This is during COVID. Everything's shut down. Movie theaters are shut down. There's nothing coming out. I guess this went direct to streaming, and I saw it and I watched it, and I was like, holy shit, this was good. This is just a dark, miserable movie. It reminds me a lot of another one further down my list. I'm pretty sure it's on your list too. The entity, the demon itself, is just so, like it's not there to scare people. It's there to just torture people. Like there's a married older couple in the farmhouse, and like the woman is like, possessed and cutting her fingers off. It's a case of if they kill the father, like, will it end the curse? There's a brother and a sister, and it's almost like they're kind of there to fight over like who takes care of him, who's going to get the inheritance, and then it just takes some dark, dark turns.
Probably on both our lists, one of the better made films, quality wise. This one was a little bit of a slow burn. I kept questioning where was, and this is a good thing. I kept questioning where was this evil located? Was it the old man that was sick in the bed in the house throughout the entire movie, or was it the goats? It was a farm, and the farm was full of goats. And
I think it was just the farm itself, but I mean,
yeah, it might have been the whole damn farm. I'm like, is it the goats? Is it the guy? The whole movie. Okay. So we're up to my number 7. This is probably a hot take because I from what I understand, a lot of people didn't like this one. And this is the Wrong Turn remake. I've never been a huge fan of the franchise, the Wrong Turn movies. I have watched the first 3 or 4. If you want to shut your brain off and you want to see some like crazy hillbilly characters, attack a group of people who made a wrong turn on the road, I totally recommend those movies to you. They're kind of twisted. The only real thing that's the remake that's remade is the title. This is a different group, and they make a wrong turn in the woods, and they encounter a group of people, but they're not hillbillies. And everything is different. Everything's a little bit better, a little bit more modern. And I thought that what they encounter was really creepy. And then what they're faced with, because they're kind of like put on trial, what they're faced with is just pure. I mean, you tell me that you're going to do that to me. Like they told them that their punishment was to be like thrown in a cave, and that they were going to burn their eyes out and just just left thrown in the cave. Fend for yourself. The female and the male who were boyfriend and girlfriend, the female they were very smart kids. And she was like very quickly on, thought it up. Like, listen, don't do this. We can help you. We can work with you. We'll be one of you. We can add to your people. We can help you in ways. My boyfriend is good at, landscaping, whatever it was that he was, and I can be a good provider, And so, it takes it down this weird path. And then unbeknownst to everybody, the father of that girl is searching for her throughout this whole time, and so you get that inevitable, collision course. I just thought it was so much better. And I guess that's where it's a hot take. I think it's the best of the franchise.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, it's a good movie. It's kind of like a more serious Hills Have Eyes. I just, like, if you want the fun and the camp, I mean, they even say in the movie, they're like, oh, you're thinking of like the mutant cannibals. That's not us. Like, that's not this movie.
Yeah, they poke at it at the end of the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, to even call it a remake, and I mean, obviously it is, like, it's a completely different movie. It is 100% serious. It's played straight. There's a good movie there. People definitely overlooked it because they expected just another wrong turn movie. All right, so my number 7 is going to be your number 5. So we'll hold on that. And then it looks like your number 6 I have way higher on my list. So we're going to hold on that. So I'm going to jump to my number 6, which is 2024's Immaculate. My girl, Sydney Sweeney. There's always a phenomenon that wows me. In 81, it was werewolf movies. In 97, it was like disaster movies, meteorite movies. In 98, 99. In this year, it's Rosemary's Baby Omen ripoffs. And we got one of each, and then we got Immaculate. Michael Mohan, who likes making movies where Sydney Sweeney gets naked, made a really good one following up on his 2021's The Voyeurs. And this is basically, Sydney Sweeney becomes a nun. They kind of do the Antichrist thing, but they flip it on its head. Maybe it's not the Antichrist. Maybe it's the second coming. There's a very bizarre, like super Orthodox Roman Catholic church that she's confined to. She finds herself supernaturally pregnant, and a whole bunch of weird nun shit ensues. What I loved about this was it actually put like nunsploitation back in the conversation, and people who didn't know that is like a whole subgenre of movies started finding some really fucking weird shit, all of which I own, of course. And just like all of a sudden you start seeing like letterbox reviews pop up for things like, anything from Satanico Pandemonium to Christiana Devil Nun, Flavia the Heretic, all this weird fucking 70s shit that no normal person's ever heard of. But this movie was a lot of fun. I think Sydney Sweeney is definitely up and coming. She started out pretty much in horror with one of Carpenter's worst with The Ward, and she just gets better and better, and she's pretty easy on the eyes.
I found out about Sydney Sweeney through Euphoria, which is an HBO show, a Zendaya vehicle. But Zendaya is just one of many characters on that show, and it's kind of like, I guess you could say it's kind of like a Fast Times at Ridgemont High for like this kind of generation. It's teenagers doing all types of insanity, drugs, sex, you name it, they're doing it. I enjoyed Immaculate. The only thing that suffers for me is that this was like the fourth nun movie I saw in like a 2-month span, something like that. I mean, right after Immaculate, you had the first Omen like a couple of weeks later, or a week later, I think it was.
Yeah.
And they were so similar.
Yep.
Immaculate is a little bit more science-based, as opposed to First Omen, which is a little bit more supernatural, obviously based on the Omen movies. But I thought it was a poor job because of the whole parent thing. But let me not get into that because we're not talking about that movie. But I enjoyed it. You're right. Sweeney's fantastic in it. Like, she is in everything that she does. I mean, I seek her out. The ending has like this kind of close up. The camera's right on her face, and she's just like covered in blood. And she has to pretty much do it all with her face.
Yeah.
It's great. Nice way to cap it. I like that.
That's definitely where she won me over, and I was like, oh wow, she's actually like a really good actress too.
Let's go to my 5, and my 5 is Terrifier 3. Just come out about a month ago.
I came to Brooklyn for it.
You came to Brooklyn and we watched it opening night. What a great time. It improves on the second movie with a better pace and a better runtime, something that I complained about new movies. So I got to give it credit for that. Also get better performances from the two leads. David Howard Thornton and Lauren Levera do even better. Levera does kind of like I would say Rob Zombie Halloween 2 PTSD kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
She's just all messed up from the events of the second movie, while David Howard Thornton gets to play in the Christmas sandbox, with the whole Santa thing. And he looks like they should pay him to do this, man. It looks like he's having too much fun doing this. There's this like one scene, and you got to understand, he has 0 lines to any of these movies. He has to do everything with his body, with his hand movements, whatever it is, his facial expressions. There's this one moment where there's like this college student who's obsessed with the murders from the previous two movies, and she's actually talking to her boyfriend, and the boyfriend's like, "Do you want to have sex with the clown?" And not knowing that the clown's like right outside the door, and she, they're talking about, and he's doing these like hand movements, like "Get the hell out of here! I wouldn't sleep with you," kind of like animal. Everybody in the audience was dying laughing. Like that's where he elevated it for me from the second and the first movie.
It was such a great time, and I mean, I was just looking around that theater, seeing a little kid who was like trying to sneak into the movie, dressed up as Art the Clown. Like for me, this is the movie like where Nightmare 4 was the MTV Freddy. Like all I could think of when we were watching that movie was the scene in New Nightmare where like Robert Englund as Freddy comes out on like the talk show and he's in the audience and doing like the hand waving and the crowd is just going nuts. Like this is Art the Clown is the new guy. You look at this movie and then you look at Art in the first movie and it's night and day difference. Like he's dark, he's sinister. In this one, he's not anywhere near as exaggerated as Bugs Bunny Freddy, but you could tell he's having the time of his life. He kind of takes a backseat to the Victoria character, which my only fault with this movie, and it's a big fault with the previous one. We'll get into that. Like they don't really explain the lore, and you're kind of left doing the heavy lifting yourself. If you go on Wikipedia right now and look up the plot of Terrifier 2, it will say shit that's not in that movie. And I've rewatched that movie like 3 times in the last month. This shit is not in the movie, and they're like, "This is what happened. We swear." So you do get a little bit more answered in Terrifier 3, but I really liked how Art is basically like the second in command to what was like the little pale girl and is now basically like the demon that just possessed Victoria or Vicky. I was going back and forth on, is it like, does it fit the Christmas thing? I don't know if they did that just because they wanted to be like, Art isn't confined to Halloween, but man, is it great for this movie? Is it great for this franchise? There's so much callback to things like Silent Night, Deadly Night, like Pieces. This is the movie we were talking about where it has an 80s feel. It has a campy feel. It's so much fun, so much schlock. They nailed the runtime versus the last one, at least for me. And there's definitely a bunch of kills in this movie I'm sure we're going to be talking about. The only drawback for me with this one, but obviously not enough that it didn't make both of our lists, the little girl was really, really good, the new little girl. But man, was she basically just playing like Danielle Harris in Halloween.
My biggest negative of Terrifier 3 is the soundtrack is uneventful compared to the second one, which I'll talk about later on.
Oh my God, I love the original Christmas music though. I'm still waiting for that shit to come out like without the background audio and just the lyrics. I will be putting that on my iPod immediately. Yes, I still have an iPod that I play in my car, but oh my God, did I love that original Christmas music and like the Christmas like elevator music of the Clown Cafe remix they were playing in the mall. Oh, that shit was great. Otherwise, I agree. I mean, they didn't even play like Sienna's theme until the credits, and then when that hit, like the people in the theater were like, "Oh, that's great, yeah," But like, no, there wasn't really beyond the original Christmas music. There wasn't really anything recognizable in the movie. All right, so we're gonna bounce my number 5 and take it away for Terrifier 2, a movie I want to love, but there's parts of the whole it's just not there for me. So sell me on it.
Terrifier 2, I thought was a huge step from the first Terrifier. The soundtrack is one of the things that kind of caught me early. Like for beginning of the movie, I started pulling out my phone and Shazamming songs. Introduces a final girl that you can root for. It has a little bit more of a fantasy element, which I'm all in on. I love like those kind of sword and sorcery type movies. And ironically, Leon said he was inspired by like the Conans and the Beastmasters when he did this. But it worked. gives you something to root for. It's not just a clown running around killing people, which is what the first movie was. It was more like a straight bare bones slasher with not much of a story. This had a kind of story. And then, as you mentioned, they're not giving you the entire story up front. This is more like I'm giving you a little bit here and a little bit there, and you're going to have to wait till the next movie to get a little bit more. But a lot of critics didn't like Terrifier 2 for that. They were like, they didn't explain anything. I took it as like, okay, I think it's going to be explained in the third movie. They give you a little bit. They give you the origin of the little pale girl. They gave you some information on the father, on Sienna's father, and why she did those drawings in that book. They didn't explain anything about a magic sword and stuff like that, but you kind of just got to go with it. I will admit, this one has a runtime that's way too long.
Yes.
Like they have this dream sequence, and I guess thought he was going full Freddy Krueger with this dream sequence, with the whole clown cafe thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that sequence goes way too long. That alone is like it feels like a 25-minute cut in the middle of the movie.
Yeah,
As,
that,
as,
and I'm sure we'll get to it when we get to the kills, but there is a kill in that movie that goes on so fucking long, it becomes like a Family Guy joke for me.
I loved it. I loved I loved it. I think I need that. Like it's like a tension breaker for me.
I will push back on one thing, and this is something that a lot of people I've seen them saying, and far be it from me, I'm a huge fan of Sienna Shaw, but I don't think we can call her a final girl. She dies.
She goes full Electra, I'll admit that, but I think that the third movie has established that there is some sort of biblical thing going on there.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
She's totally resurrected. She's back, but I'm saying she did die.
Because she gets resurrected, does that disqualify her as being a final girl? I don't know, maybe. Because it's a supernatural, this one is supernatural. The first one really wasn't. The third one kind of definitely shows that she's a final girl, I think.
Yeah,
Because
the
she's
third
made
one
these two
definitely.
movies. Now, the question is she going to be one of the great ones? Is she going to be a Laurie Strode? Is she going to be, Neve Campbell? Is she going to be Nancy from Elm Street? I think it's too soon to say.
I think she's already in the conversation. I mean, she's great. She's
She's
got
a
great
favorite.
character traits. She's got a lot going for her. She's got the PTSD thing. She's got like her dark, tortured past even before the events of Terrifier 2. She sees like visions of shit. She's got hallucinations and guilt. She's got the big sister thing going for her. I mean, I think she's great.
Yeah, she's a favorite. She's a huge favorite of mine. Leon picked her because she's a martial artist, ironically.
Yeah, no, she does pretty
Yeah.
much all of her own stunts. And in
I would,
Terrifier 2, the only one she didn't do is when she falls through the floor when he stabs her. So as far as 2020's horror in general, just tying it together real quick, like, good for Terrifier, because we needed a fucking franchise that would put the exclamation point on the decade. Yes, the original Terrifier. I mean, we go all the way back to 2011 for the short, and then the first one was, 2016? But, like, 2 and 3 is what put it on the map for the mainstream. These are the movies that are making the most money. These are the ones that have everybody talking. These are the ones where people are dressing as Art the Clown for Halloween. We're up to my number 4.
okay.
Is Suitable Flesh, which I remember a lot of people raving about this when this came out. So these would be who I would call like the cinephiles, and they're into like, elevated horror, like foreign films and shit. And I was like, this is not that. This is, it's one of the guys who did Chillerama, which is a raunchy, like throwback film fest anthology movie that was absolutely hilarious. He's basically doing like a modern day Stuart Gordon, Brian Usna. It's a body jumper, Mr. Tonic, H.P. Lovecraft movie. It's got Barbara Crampton. It's got Heather Graham. I was watching it again with Sarah, and she's like, this is some of the worst acting I've ever seen. She's like, what the hell is Heather Graham doing with this dialogue? It tries to be sexy. There's barely any nudity. There's just a lot of heavy breathing. I mean, we were laughing at it. It's schlocky as all hell. It's basically the Hidden. And I was explaining to her, I was like, "You remember that movie, The Hidden?" And she's like, "No." I was like, "You remember Jason Goes to Hell?" And she's like, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, it's like that."
I love the premise. You got Barbara Crampton and Heather Graham. So
Mm-hmm.
Barbara Crampton did a lot of horror movies where she showed a lot of skin back in the day. Heather Graham obviously did Boogie Nights and a few other movies where she didn't mind getting sexy. So you put those two together and you're gonna have some fun with this kind of body swapping movie. Like I mentioned, I think it does have a similarity to both It Follows and Smile. It just doesn't have the solid rules. Would you
Oh
call it
shit!
B
This is
movie?
the movie you were talking about.
Yes, this is
I
more
thought
of
you were
a.
talking about Dark and the Wicked.
Oh no, I'm thinking. I'm saying this one has that kind of entity that's jumping from body to body
Right. No. Okay.
in
I got you.
in a sort of kind of weird way.
I
And it
got you.
follows. And it follows. It jumps through sex.
Right.
In Smile, it jumps through, I guess, the witnessing of a kill.
Yeah.
Right? So, but this one's a little confusing because it starts out like with a sex thing.
And then it's an incantation because
Then there's like a chant, and then they say something about you. There's it focuses in on blood touching someone,
Mm-hmm.
and then it focuses on two people touching hands. So it confused the crap out of me. Is it about them having sex? If it's about the chant, then something's missing because the first link that they get is when they have sex.
It's a Shutter
Right.
original.
It was a Shutter movie, right? Exactly. This is not like on that level. This is more like kind of B level movie.
Yep.
So if you're watching it for that sex premise, I'm all in. I'm on,
Yeah.
and Heather Graham was great. She did this scene where she's trying to get back with her husband or boyfriend or whatever, and she just goes all out, ties him up and stuff. I was like, yes, this is what I want.
Oh, it's great. She's playing like an
Yeah,
old man trapped in her body, and she's like smoking doobies and sipping whiskey and flirting with the cop. It was hysterical.
right. She's flirting with the female cop, like when the cops show up.
Yep.
Great. Like this is one of those like niche movies, like I mentioned before, like Candyland, that I would recommend to a certain few. And number three is Barbarian. So I find Barbarian to be very similar to Malignant in the sense that it has a kind of silly twist at a certain point in the movie. And that can either sway you on the movie, right? But I think that Barbarian as a whole does it just better. It's a slasher, but not really. It's more one of those Airbnb movies that I mentioned earlier, that kind of genre
Mm-hmm.
where a woman shows up in Detroit. I don't know what it is about Detroit. A lot of movies being made in Detroit lately. Shows up in Detroit late at night, and it's funny because I have this debate with Rox a lot about whenever we plan a trip, and she's like, "Oh, look, I found a great deal on Expedia." I'm like, "You don't know what neighborhood that is."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the hotel looks nice or the Airbnb looks nice. We have no idea what that kind of town that is. Like we're kind of taking a risk. We don't know. We need to find out a little bit more. And this is exactly why. Like she shows up late at night. She has no idea where she's at. She goes to an Airbnb and then there's somebody already in the house. And you really don't want to say much more about the movie when you're recommending it to somebody because you don't want to spoil anything. Because it kind of goes, the movie changes like at different points. Like there's different characters get introduced. I have a fear of like since I was a kid of like going into like a dark basement, dark basements with poor lighting and creepy basements. And this has that kind of aspect. And then the basement leads into like a series of tunnels, underground tunnels. I'm not going down there. That's just and there's like a room with a beat up old mattress and a poop bucket and camera. You never want to see some shit like if you see some shit like that in real life, you're running your ass off out of there.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So women are taught certain things when they get into situations with men, and justifiably so. And this goes through those kind of beats when she has to stay with a stranger inside of an Airbnb, and like he makes her a cup of tea, and
Right.
she's
She
like
won't drink the
she's not
tea. She
he's
like,
not drinking the tea. So he's like, I'm gonna pour you some wine. I'm gonna open it in front of you so you see, and I'm gonna drink it first so you see I'm not that guy. I'm not trying to drug you or anything. Other characters which also play those kind of how do you put it? It's like the Lifetime channel. Like men will hurt you because this is
yeah.
Lifetime. Right? I have different male characters that are like bad to women, so to speak, right? And then you have this other kind of character, kind of motherly character. I don't want to get into that, but the movie's just has layers to it, and I just thought it was very
I mean,
clever.
literally, yeah.
Have like a little bit of a silly comic twist, very similar to Malignant. I thought it just did it a little bit better, but I could see somebody saying they prefer Malignant more. It's more a question of taste.
My number three is a weird ass French movie called Titane. It's for 2021, directed by Julia Ducournau. This is a body horror movie. It is basically a remake, gender swap remake of a phenomenal sci-fi techno horror called Tetsuo the Iron Man. I think we've talked about it at least in passing on this podcast. If you've never seen that, you can find the whole movie on YouTube. It will give you nightmares, and it's incredible. This is basically a movie about a woman who has sex with a car and then starts to become a car. She's also a serial killer, and to hide, she becomes like a fake transgender at a firehouse because the fire chief's son was like kidnapped and missing, and he just wants to pretend. It's got some great kills. It's got some crazy ass fucking moments in it. You know, I know you messaged me in particular about one of the most nefarious ones, and I was out with Sarah because you know she's seen most of the things on my list, or she at least knew about them. I was like, "Look at this text from Frank," and you're describing the scene, and she's like, "What sick shit are you making them watch?"
Listen, man, this was a special movie, man. Special movie. I fell in love with it. It's like extremely abstract and ever changing. Where we go from like car porn to serial killer movie in the blink of an eye, and then you blink again, and like the main character's having sex with a car, and you're like, what's going on here? And then pregnant from the car, and is dripping like motor oil out of her vagina. Like, okay. But then all of a sudden she's on the run because she tried to kill a group of people and it was just too much. One of them escaped. She's pretending to be this firefighter's lost son. Almost like the movie changes genres just right then and there and becomes just one of the guys or she's the man, but the horror body horror version, you know? It's everywhere and nothing makes sense, but you just go with it. My number two is X. I love mashups. I love mashup songs. I love mashup movies. I don't know who it was. Ty West said, let's take a Texas Chainsaw kind of story and mix it with Boogie Nights. Love it. You got a great premise. You got great kills. You got this weird scene involving granny porn, which was awkward and yet hilarious. But this is kind of Mia Goth's big movie where people were starting to notice her a little bit more. Ortega's here for a smaller role, but she does, when it comes to the whole Boogie Nights aspect of it, because the movie is all about a group of young people in the 70s trying to make a porn movie, which makes sense. And they needed a cheap place to film. And so they rent out this barn in the back of a farm to film like the old farmer's daughter horror porn movie. Realizing that the two people who they're renting the place from, they're an elderly couple and there's some sort of threat there. Jenna Ortega, she's not really one of this group. She's like the girlfriend of the guy who's filming the group. And so after seeing a few of these sex scenes, she gets a little turned on and she tells her boyfriend, I want to be in the next scene. And he's like, oh, hell no. Like, you're my girlfriend. What are you talking about? We're here to work. And she's like, yeah, but, they convinced me like I'm into it. I want to try. I want to be in the movie. You guys say, you're young, have fun. So, and it has that kind of drama aspect. And, the boyfriend it unfortunately has to film it, which is like, oh God. Like, if you're that guy, like, oh my God, to have to film it. I don't know. I just little things like that just made me. And then each of these characters is kind of fleshed out very well, even though it's not a long movie. You know, the main character is Mia Goth, who's like this young, up and coming porn actress she doesn't want to be a porn actress. She wants to be a star. I loved it. It's my favorite of the trilogy because it is a trilogy now. This movie is individually different from the other two. So I could totally see others having a completely different favorite, because if you like your more serial killer type of movie, that would be the second one. If you like heavy 80s stuff, you might like the third. The third suffers from that ending stuff that I talked about. Third has a ridiculous ending, or it would be on this list.
For me, it's kind of like Terrifier 2. It's like parts of a whole. The beginning half is great, but I feel like once the people start to die off, like that's just the rest of the movie. It's like, all right, we're just gonna kill everybody now, and then it ends.
Yeah, it's a slasher. It's gonna go. It's gonna.
Yeah, no, I know. I expected more. I don't know, more story, more theme, more something to tie it all together. But like you said, there's different of the trilogy for everybody. Pearl is definitely my favorite of the trilogy. So my number 2 is probably the first movie of 2020, first horror movie of 2020, and definitely the first one I saw in theaters and the last one before the big shutdown. Underwater. This one came out of nowhere. It was billed as, like the modern day Leviathan, The Abyss, Deep Star 6. People will compare it to Alien. It is a wild ride. It's like a super underwater rig, and there's a team, and then like shit just starts going wrong because of the pressure and things are breaking. Then they get out into the actual like bottom of the ocean, and there's like these creatures. Is it just like ocean life? It kind of looks like at the time DC Comics was doing like a whole Aquaman push, making him like a serious character because the general public he was always a joke. And they introduced these like race of deep sea monsters called the Trench, and that's what these things look like. That's what they remind me of. And there's just a lot of like almost like a Poseidon Adventure or any one of those like disaster movies where you gotta like everybody has to work as a team and go through like different segments of how to like fix the rig and go from one place to the other place, and more bad shit keeps happening. And then in the third act, we find out like what's really going on. And if you don't see it coming, you're like, oh, it's one of those movies. Holy shit.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Very similar to like the mashup thing that I mentioned. It's a mashup. It's got elements of other movies, like you said, Alien, Abyss. I felt a little Descent in there in the beginning because they were kind of having to crawl through like crevices and cracks to finding dead people. I really liked the cast. Had that dude from Archive 81, a TV show that I really thought was going to go somewhere but got canceled. The girl from Twilight with an Eminem hairstyle.
Yeah.
Loved it, And, a sleeper guy in TJ Miller, which is like, for me, TJ Miller is the real reason why the first Deadpool movie is still the best. He helped write the first Deadpool movie. And he was in the second one, but that one was more Ryan Reynolds, and Ryan Reynolds was being a dick to him, and that's why he's not in the third one. Miller has a good eye for stuff. His comedy is good, and you see that in this movie. He's good. I said I love the mashup stuff, so I thought it was good. Nice little like creature feature, underwater, like you said, Leviathan, Deep Star 6. I love those type of movies. Kind of a throwback. So my number 1 is When Evil Lurks. I thought it was the best horror film of 2023. It's a different take on possession. It takes place in Argentina. It's an Argentinian movie. Apparently, with their culture, possession has kind of an infectious angle to it. Possession, but it's more like you can catch it like a disease kind of thing.
There's rules.
There's all
use electronics.
It very subtly explains it throughout the movie. It's not like it's just an exposition dump at the beginning of the movie. They don't do it that way. It's more explained like they encounter people who are familiar with it, so they're able to explain it on the way because you have all these crazy situations. It's basically a group of brothers, two brothers. They find a dead body. They go investigate, and they find out that the dead body belonged to somebody who is what they call a cleaner, somebody who, that version of an exorcist. They find a possessed person on a neighbor's land, and the family's like, we don't know what to do. That person was supposed to clean them out. And so they get the owner of the land, and the owner of the land is like, we gotta get rid of this, like, because he knows the people of that culture. They know, you know, you don't want to mess around with this thing. You don't want to touch him. You definitely don't want to kill him. The worst thing you can do is kill him. It's just gonna, because that evil is just gonna latch on to you. I mean, the possessed person, which looks like a human pimple, it's disgusting. The effects, whoever did the effects for this, is, oh my god. He hires the two brothers to throw the guy onto the back of a pickup truck and get rid of him. And unfortunately, he ends up disappearing on the way, and everybody's afraid of being infected, so to speak. Favorite scene is the main brother going to his ex-wife's house because he's like, we got to get out of Dodge. I got to take anybody who's my family, who I love. We got to get the hell up out of here. That's he shows up at his ex-wife's house, who he hasn't seen in like 4 years. He's grabbing his kids. Her new man is there at the house. She's not even there yet. And he's like, what the hell are you doing here? He's burning his clothes on the sidewalk. He's naked. It's just such a ridiculous, crazy scene. And then she shows up, and as anyone you would expect, an ex-wife, your ex-husband shows up, he's naked in your house in front of your children, burning clothes, scaring the crap out of your children, you're going to lose your shit, right? So I just thought it was so awesome. Like, everything just worked, and it just gets so dark and twisted. And this is the movie that you and I both mentioned is a better version of Dark and the Wicked than Dark and the
Yes.
Wicked, right? So
Yeah. With what happens in the next scene.
yeah, I don't want to spoil too much of it, but it's just so.
It's almost like, like a more serious modern day set in Argentina version of something like Demons. You get so much background world building. Like, this is like almost like the end of the world. The apocalypse is slowly rolling on, and like, this shit has happened. Everyone knows about it, but like, they don't really take it that seriously. They're like, oh, the Rottens only show up in like the country and they don't come to the city, and like, we don't have to really worry about it. And then like, the grandmother is like, no, this is like super serious, and there's 7 rules, and if you break the rules, like, you're fucked. And it gets darker and darker, and you're like following these characters, you're rooting for these characters, and then at the end of the movie, you're just left with them like, damn.
We've been bitching about endings for this whole segment, and this ending is perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, the movie has no flaws to me. I don't think it does.
My number one, I'm sure we're going to agree, is definitely not the perfect ending. And I know our regular Brendan is not a fan of this movie at all. I loved it. It is just the perfect mix of schlocky, campy, ridiculous, The Substance. 2024, and I agree with you. I had When Evil Lurks was my favorite, not only horror movie of 23, my favorite movie of 23. Right now, The Substance is my favorite movie of the year, period. Definitely horror movie. It's like a sci-fi horror. It's another one of those in line with like Stuart Gordon, Brian Usna. There's a movie no one's ever seen or heard of from, I think, 89 called Rejuvenator or Rejuvenatrix. And this is basically like almost a complete remake of that. I can't imagine they were aware of that movie, but it's kind of the same thing. So you have Demi Moore is like this aging Suzanne Summers, like, aerobics instructor, celebrity, and she turns 50, and Dennis Quaid, doing the most over-the-top Harvey Weinstein, fires her, and is like, we need to replace her with someone young and hot. So the convention of the movie is this thing called The Substance, and basically it creates a younger, better version of you. there's a lot of background world building in that. Like, it's not really explained. And then on the second watch, I was like, oh, I guess it is kind of like written into the instructions and it's in the infomercial. So she ends up taking it and sprouts a market quality, and she basically takes over her life. The convention is that they share the same body. She keeps herself rejuvenated by stealing Demi Moore's spinal fluid, and then they switch off every 7 days. And it's an insane body horror. It goes to crazy lengths, tons of nudity, tons of camp. And the cinematographer, her quote was, she was hired to do wide angle or Dutch angles of palm trees and close ups on butts. And she's like, I think I did my job pretty damn good.
Ended up being number 6 on my list. It's the craziest movie of the year. Absolutely. It's definitely the craziest. I'm not big on body horror, but this is how you do it. I thought the new actress who played the younger version of Demi Moore did a really great job. The movie is all about women losing their sex appeal, their looks, and they really focus on that. The close-up, gratuitous butt, crotch, breasts, you name it. Like, at the end of the movie, I felt like I knew this young girl, like, personally. You've seen every crevice of her body, and almost to a point where like, you feel gross about it. It's like if you smoke cigarettes and your dad shoves you in the closet and makes you smoke a whole pack. You're gonna be like disgusted by him by the end. Like, I felt like that's what they were trying to do. They're
Oh,
trying to
absolutely.
they're trying to put it in your face to the point where you're grossed out by it. And I thought it did its job. I thought Dennis Quaid stole the show. He was so over the top. He does this scene where he's just like eating shrimps.
Yes.
And he's like dipping them in this like kind of nasty ass sauce and just chomping on them while he's talking to Demi Moore and checking out the waitress next to, like, total womanizer type guy. For me, it does suffer a little with the runtime and ending. Totally go all out for the ending.
They do, and it's got like 5 acts, and like by the 4th act, people are either going to be completely on board or completely checked out. For me, like I fucking loved it. And they bring it home. The final shot of the movie, I was applauding.
I agree. The final shot was great, but I do feel like there's a scene where there's like a boob pops out of her eye.
Yeah,
Like you could have edited like a couple of minutes out of that shit. The part where they're like spraying blood at the crowd.
yeah, for like a minute and a half straight.
Bonkers, crazy, batshit crazy, any kind of crazy you could think of. It's there. I've already recommended it to a ton of people, and anybody who's going to check it out, they come back to me like, "Oh my god, I can't believe it."
See my face in lights, on my name on marquees found down on Broadway. Even if it ain't what it seems, I got a pocket full of dreams, baby. I'm from New York, concrete.